The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another episode of Music Weekly here on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt. Great to have you along with us. We are now officially 1/2 of a year into Music Weekly. This is episode number 26. We have been rolling along for 1/2 of a year, and we've got a chance to listen to a lot of great music over the past 6 months here on Music Weekly. We've discovered a lot of bands out there that we would not have known about otherwise, and certainly have found a lot of interesting music out there that we really didn't know was still being made, not just here in the U.S., but all over the world. And the guy who helps me basically make this thing happen, he puts the list together every week. He puts a YouTube list together every week. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going. Yeah, we are almost through July even, so we are moving right along. And to your point, I always kind of thought that with the amount of music being made out there, whatever you like, someone's out there doing it. It really wasn't until doing this podcast that I realized just how much of that music really is out there. Like, I thought maybe there were a handful of bands playing, power metal or classic metal, traditional metal, whatever. But no, there are tons of them, as it turns out.
Yeah, really from all corners of the world and all kinds of different languages. And it's been pretty wild to find this out each and every week. And we've certainly been really excited to get to put this together and get a chance to bring it to you each and every Sunday night here on the Nerdcast Empire. Chris joining us in the chat as well. He's made his way back to Parts Unknown after his trip up to see Metallica and, of course, his favorite band, Five Finger Death Punch. We'll just keep making that statement until it's canon. I was going to joke with him because they were performing in Cincinnati this past week. I was like, you didn't have to go all the way to Boston to see Five Finger Death Punch. You just could have gone to Riverbend and then seen them. But no, Chris.
Lesson learned.
Yeah, absolutely. But Chris had a chance to go up there, and we'll get a chance to catch up with Chris on the podcast here soon to kind of talk about his experience and what he enjoyed from that trip. But this week, we're going to get to a couple quick news stories, but we really wanted to kind of start off talking about the fact that this is now 6 months in. We're turning the corner on the second half of a year as far as this podcast goes. Of course, we just passed the 1 year mark on the Nerdcast Empire. We certainly appreciate everybody who has checked us out, whether it's live on Twitch, as we've done for the last quite a few months now, I guess, or it's on their podcast platforms or on YouTube on the VOD. Wherever you check us out, we really appreciate it. We certainly encourage you to go to twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire. Drop us a follow if you like what you hear, because that is where we are kind of our primary hub right now for this podcast each and every week. But you had the chance, Mike, to put together some statistics on this podcast and on some of the bands we've chosen and where they've come from, and kind of take a look and break down and see if there are any patterns as far as that goes. I guess I'll toss it to you and kind of get your initial thoughts on what you found out when you started kind of putting all this together.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've already kind of known that there were some patterns as far as countries that just so happen to produce a lot of the music we enjoy. I think it's almost been a running joke that we always tend to pick bands from Sweden. As it turns out, yeah, that is kind of the case. Almost 13% of the new music picks we've made since the beginning are from Sweden. Wasn't quite nearly as many as from the United States, where they almost had 30%, but also not overly surprising. There are undoubtedly a lot more bands in general here in the United States. It's just a matter of the law of averages would suggest that we're going to find more from there. That being said, kind of looking into it, the top three, if we want to kind of go with an Olympics theme here, the gold, silver, and bronze for the Nerdcast Empire up to this point, middle of the year. Like I said, with 30%, you get the United States of America getting the gold. Some standout albums included Mega Colossus with Showdown. They're from North Carolina. We got Vexing Hex, Solvet Coagula from Illinois. And Witherfall, Sounds of the Forgotten from California. Bringing in the silver, we got Sweden with 13%. A couple of the standouts over the course of this first half of the year were Nestor with Teenage Rebel and Arcado with Open Sea.
Both really good albums.
And rounding out the top three with 8% of our choices was Germany with the bronze. A couple big albums from Germany, Emu Bulls from back in January, Level Fix It, and then Feuerschwanz with Warriors. But yeah, we have several other countries that did pretty well, didn't quite make the cut. The United Kingdom, Canada, and Italy go down from there. But yeah, it's been a half of a year.
Yeah, like Chris said, I was a little surprised at Italy not being higher. Of course, Italy kind of gets maybe an assist on some of these because obviously Frontier's music is based out of Italy, and there have been a lot of bands that we have chosen from that label that are not from Italy themselves, but kind of get an assist because the band or the album, the label, I should say, is located in Italy. What's more interesting, maybe to me, than the teams that are winning gold, silver, and bronze are the countries that are putting their flag in the ground and getting on this list, and places that I certainly never would have even considered that we would find music for this podcast. But here we are. We have chosen at least one band during this time. What were some of the more interesting places that the Nerdcast Empire has traveled in the first 6 months?
So yeah, in the first 6 months, we've had a band from Cyprus, we've had a band from the Faroe Islands, we've had a band from Malta, and Tunisia as well. Just places that you're probably not going to immediately think, hey, this is where all the metal's happening. But out of 149 weekly new release picks, that's not bad at all. And kind of going back to the point about Italy, they had 7 albums so far this year, so definitely not a bad amount by any means.
Yeah, it's kind of wild just looking at these numbers. And again, just I didn't know what I expected when we started this. I certainly didn't expect the quality of music maybe that we found. Yeah, we have had a lot of listeners from Cyprus. I think that getting that one band from Cyprus was able to kind of jump us up there. But it's amazing that there's so much good music out there, and also kind of a shame that it's taken a project like this to discover this music. This is the kind of music that should be on the radio somewhere, should be getting mainstream airplay, and so little of it is, at least in the U.S. Now, some of this may be getting mainstream airplay overseas. It feels like Europe is still going strong as far as playing this type of music on the radio. As you can see, usually a lot of these songs still chart overseas, but it would be nice if there were some stations over here that would kind of get on board with some of these bands and give them the exposure they deserve, because some of these, in a different era and a different time would be very big acts that, right now are probably doing very well, for themselves, but not as good as they probably should be.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that there wouldn't be some amount of a market or appetite for music like that being more mainstream here in the States. I did just want to shout out real quick from Cyprus. We had Hard Draw with their album Abyss of Mankind. Faroe Islands, we had Tyr with their Battle Ballads album. Malta, we had Damage and Company with The Grand Illusion. Shout out to them. We just heard from them this past week.
Yeah.
And Tunisia, we had Myrath with Karma.
Yeah, so shout out to all those bands and those countries. And who knows where the Nerdcast Empire will go next, because we actually will be adding another country to this list on today's episode. So that'll increase the number. It's already included in Mike's stats. But anything else from the stats that kind of jumps out at you before we kind of move on to some news headlines?
Oh, let's see here. Like I mentioned, we did have 30% of them being from the United States. Probably not too surprising that California leads the way with 11. We had 6 that really weren't attributable to any specific state, mostly kind of super groups that came from multiple places. We did have a couple from Ohio. We might be adding a new one there this week as well. But all in all, we had, not counting the states that we couldn't figure out, 19 states represented. So we're making our way through the country as well.
Well, and that also, again, not just there's music being made everywhere in the world, but there's also music being made everywhere here in the United States. And that was not necessarily the case 10, 15, 20 years ago. You had to go to L.A. or New York or Nashville or Chicago. You had to go basically to one of these big cities to get your albums produced. And now you can do it at home. You can do it in your own home studio and put something out there and get it out on Bandcamp. And who knows, it could take off from there. So it's an encouraging sign. And if you're listening to this podcast and you've been thinking about starting a band, there's really nowhere in the world that you can hear this podcast that you couldn't start your own band, produce your own music. Like, it literally is for anybody who can get the equipment to do it.
Yeah, it's definitely more accessible now. And while I don't have the numbers in front of me, I know another trend that we've seen throughout this first 6+ months is how many individual projects there are, where it's just one person that's a multi-instrumentalist and can put it all together. a lot of cases they end up bringing in musicians to collaborate with or tour with, but so many of these individuals are creating music on their own. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's the other side to it too. You don't necessarily need a band to be able to do this. If you're talented enough, you can pretty much do it all by yourself. And it seems like every other week or every third week we come across an outstanding single performer that basically does the whole thing themselves. And we've spotlighted a lot of them over the time in this 6 months. But if you're live with us, or if you catch us on the VOD, like, drop a note to let us know what your favorite bands of the 6 months have been. I mean, we got some favorites. I know Mike's got a list. I think at some point we're going to get a video. He's going to get a video made kind of spotlighting his list. I don't know if you want to mention them now, or do you want to wait until you get that video out? We can tease it now, or you can wait and tease it later, I guess.
Well, in a way, I kind of teased it to a degree just when naming off the bands I named during the medal ceremony, so to speak. But yeah, there's been a lot of really good stuff out there, bands that I wasn't even remotely familiar with. Those who didn't appear on or near the podium, we have Ecclesia. They were really good from France. Floating Worlds, amazing band from Greece. We have Hexstar from Italy. They were really good with their Doomsayer album. I didn't mention it during, but Holler from New York, his stuff is really good. Yeah, I think that's really as much of a tease as I can give. Honestly, when I started looking through the data, I started thinking, man, I need to go back and listen to that and that and that. And there were some where I'm like, I need to kind of refresh my memory as to why I enjoyed this one so much.
Yeah.
So I definitely would like to go ahead and put together like a mid-year awards kind of thing, a top 10 perhaps, but I need to do a little more homework before I can set that in stone, I think.
Chris mentioning the Intimidator, the Dale Earnhardt tribute band.
That's the awkward thing, is that I don't believe that was actually a pick of anyone's, was it?
I don't think so. I think we just spotlighted it, right?
Yeah. I probably should find some way to add that to the data, because that was really great.
Yeah, it really was fantastic. But it's been a wild year for sure, or half year, I guess. It hasn't even been a full year yet. So we'll see what happens going forward. Of course, this week's picks technically count in that first 6 months, and we'll be getting to those shortly. So certainly look forward to see what we add to the list for the first 6 months. Just a couple of quick news stories on the agenda today before we get to our picks for the week. And this one isn't so much a news story as just a notable quote that brings up a discussion that we've had many times before, talking about Rat singer Stephen Pearcy basically asked about his thoughts on the term hair metal, and we've talked about it a lot. Eddie Trunk probably has a whole dissertation written on it at this point. But basically, Pearcy, there's really two sides of the argument. There are the people who don't really care, and there are people that really do care. Pearcy kind of falling into the, I don't really care. Like, you still remember my music 40 years later. That's really kind of what's most important. And it's like, it's not really something he came up with. They had their rat and roll, and nobody really talked about it that way at the time, talking about how it was mostly just glam rock. But he's like, if people want to call it that, it is what it is. Obviously, there are multiple people on both sides.
Yeah.
Sebastian Bach, obviously, very much against it, or was he for it? I can't remember what the argument was.
He was against it.
He was against it. It was Dee Snider who was okay with it because he kind of made a career on the hair metal. And it kind of went back and forth. There's basically this article, which I'll post from Blabbermouth. It kind of gives both sides of the argument. We've talked about it before a little bit, so we won't get too much into detail on that. But, it's funny because there's a band that's going to be featured in the vault today that I feel like was kind of in that era where they got pigeonholed into the term hair metal. And I think that's the issue we both have with it is, if you want to consider yourself a hair band, that's completely fine. Like, nobody's going to be mad at you because you've decided to do that. The problem is the stigma that came with it right as it was ending, especially as grunge was really taking over, took a lot of bands in the early 90s and categorized them under hair metal, which immediately, as it became not popular, forced all those bands off the radio. And so, you had bands that were incredibly talented. And you even mentioned a little bit last week when we were talking about 1989 in the vault, where there were these bands that were just getting started that were probably 2 or 3 years too late to really get the exposure they would have gotten had they started in 85 or 86.
Yeah.
And it feels like this is kind of a tangent of that, that hair metal label for a lot of bands was kind of a death sentence.
Yeah, I think in 2024, it's not a big deal anymore, really. I get Stephen Pearcy's mindset on it because that guy's maintained a pretty good career since then. I think there was kind of that dark period once grunge first hit, but Rats and Stephen Pearcy, they seem really chill and they tour, and I think for him you might as well own it because clearly there are still people out there that want to hear your music. The problem to me really is more when it first hit, because that was when you were attacking people's music integrity. Really, it was what you're doing isn't legitimate. Like you're just image and no substance as far as your sound goes. And it's not the only time that music has been described, or a type of music's been described by something that has nothing to do with the sound. I mean, grunge alone, grunge isn't a sound.
Right.
It's a look.
Yeah.
Boy bands.
Yeah.
That doesn't tell you what they sound like. It just tells you their demographics.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird that we choose to define music genres by visual elements. It's just a strange thing to do. At the end of the day, when you're talking about the quote-unquote hair metal bands, it's like these were bands that played instruments, wrote their songs, and it connected with a lot of people. Like, I can't imagine what's not, where there's a lack of integrity there.
Yeah.
Anyone who kind of detracted on that just kind of sounds pretentious now, I think. And that's, I remember watching, which one was it? It was The Headbanger's Journey, his kind of episodic metal documentary that he did. The episode on hair metal, it was just kind of like a lot of those grunge dudes that just crapped on hair metal just sounded kind of old and bitter about it. It was really weird to me. But as long as you're making music that connects with people, there is no this is authentic and this isn't, I don't think.
No, I would agree. And I think, again, it's not as big a deal nowadays as it was back then, but there are bands that were wrapped up in that definitely suffered because of it. And I think one of the bands we're going to talk about today is a band that's a perfect example of that. But we'll save that for the vault when we get there. Again, not a huge news item there, just something that's kind of worth a discussion. Also, not really a big news item because it's already happened today, but the Red Hot Chili Peppers were among the acts that performed at today's closing ceremonies. They, of course, the theme being that they're getting ready for the LA Olympics in 2028, so it was kind of the opportunity to spotlight California. I think Billie Eilish and Snoop Dogg were the other acts that performed in Venice Beach via satellite, obviously. But it does. First off, it's it's kind of wild to see the Chili Peppers still going at it. Like, you don't think of those guys as old, but like they're getting up there. They're from a different era as well. But it's good to see them out there still performing.
Yeah, it's funny that we had the discussion about who we would like to see perform at the opening ceremonies in LA, and obviously this is probably a good indication of what we're going to get. There are certainly worse bands out there than Red Hot Chili Peppers. There are a lot better bands.
Sure.
But, it is what it is. I'm not the target audience for any of this, so I'm not too worried about it. Bad Religion wrote about California. Like, hell, Phantom Planet wrote about California. Why can't we bring them in to perform? It is what it is.
I could see Bad Religion not wanting the corporate money that comes with performing at the Olympics and being like, nah, I don't want to, that's a little too corporate maybe.
Hey, everybody's got a price.
That's very true. That's all a cash grab. But, I think if there's going to be an American band there, I think a group like the Foo Fighters is probably still like the odds-on favorite. They're worldwide popular. They're mainstream. I could see that potentially, but but again, today, I don't want to say it was kind of an afterthought, but I mean, it still was mostly about France and them wrapping up their Olympics. I did see fair. Tom Cruise doing some ridiculous stunt where he rappelled off the top of the stadium and
that might be an Olympic sport next time around.
It might be certainly more realistic than breakdancing. And that whole thing's a shame in a way because you had somebody from Australia who basically and self-admitted that they were not into breakdancing, but they got into it just to kind of get to the Olympics and be in with the community. So, like, 99% of the memes are this one person from Australia. Like, I'm sure there were people that, had a lot of skill in breakdancing that actually deserved to be there, but instead we got the memification of, any chance of it ever coming back is probably zero just because of all the memes that came after it.
The reality of it is breakdancing is no different than any other kind of dancing. It just depends on how you feel about it. Ultimately, if you decide to have a circus, you can't be mad when clowns show up. I
also think it's not too dissimilar. Maybe not in skill, but it's basically like any other sport that you judge. Like, it's very subjective.
Yeah.
And I don't have any issue with it being there. Like, I'm probably not going to watch it, but there are a lot of sports I didn't get around to watching over the last 2 weeks. So who far be it from me to decide that's the one that needs to come out. Like,
in general, I'm not a big fan of sports that involve judges and scoring because I feel like that can be way too subjective. I would much rather a concrete set of rules and a score that you can manipulate as players in the sport.
Sure.
Once you have outside people determining what's good and what's not, I just think you're asking for controversy.
And of course, one final note before we jump back into the music part of it, breakdancing or breaking was one of the sports chosen by the Paris Olympic Committee, because each Olympic committee now gets to choose a handful of sports to add to that Olympic program. That's why baseball and softball will be back in 2028.
So they picked it just because they knew it would get attention.
I would assume so. Potentially. I don't know. Or maybe there's a strong breakdancing community in France. I don't know.
Maybe.
Also, cricket will be in the 2028 Olympics as well as part of the U.S. choosing that. And, of course, the U.S. just did really well in the
a real sport,
T20 World Cup. So maybe the U.S. will get into the Olympic cricket and probably lose to India. But, still really cool. But, each Olympic committee will get to choose a handful of sports to try to promote them. Baseball, softball, as I mentioned, coming back in 2028, so that'll certainly be good. And both those are going to be in Oklahoma City, I believe. But that's about enough of the Olympic coverage after kind of going through that. I forgot to update that on the rundown, so we'll throw that in there right there, and then we're going to move on.
That's a work in progress.
It's a manual change, so I have to do that and try to do this at the same time, which is a little more work. But we're going to get to the music now, and of course, this is the music from. Chris mentioned pro wrestling in the Olympics. I know pro wrestlers are asking for that, and honestly, there are some things in the Olympics that probably aren't too far off from that. So, anyway, moving back into the world of music, it's time for our new music of the week, and of course, we're talking about the best rock and metal music. This is music from July the 26th. Of course, Mike will go through each week, compile a list of bands that have new album releases on that date. Then we'll put together a YouTube playlist, which we will put in the chat, that has the music, at least one song from each of those bands on that date. We go through, we pick our favorites. Of course, you can check out the playlist and pick your favorites as well each and every week, and then we'll bring them to you again. And again, if you're listening on the podcast version, I try to remember to mention this early, but of course, we won't have the music clips on the podcast version. You can hear it live. That's the guaranteed place you can hear it, is live on Twitch every Sunday night at 7. If it gets through any kind of censorship as far as being removed for copyright, it will be on the VOD, both on YouTube and on Twitch. But again, if you're on the podcast version, you will not get those songs. So just another reason to check us out live every Sunday night. We're going to get to Mike's choices first. Mike, your final choices of the first 6 months of this podcast endeavor. What do you have for pick number 1 this week?
Yeah, so for my first pick, I have the first full-length album from a band from Athens, Greece. They were a heavy/power metal band. The album is A Quest for Life, and the band is Sirius.
They are very serious, but we're talking like the Star or the XM in this case, not doesn't have to be serious or something like that.
Exactly. They were a band formed in 2007. It took them until 2017 to release their first EP, Wings of Fire. I thought it was a typo on their Bandcamp or where I found this information, but I guess it's not. The band members are Dimitris Nappis on rhythm and lead guitars and vocals, Dimitris Stathopoulos on rhythm guitar and backing vocals, Dimitris Simiakis on bass and backing vocals, and Nick Samios on drums. They have 3 guys in their band named Demetrius, which kind of blew my mind.
The heck, Nick? You're not going to change your name to join this band? Was he like a last-minute fill-in or something like
Gotta
that?
assume they're just going to kick him out anytime now.
Maybe, or maybe he just joined the paperwork still in process.
So yeah, this album's very melodic, power metal, not super over the top, but just, very, very enjoyable. I saw a review on Metalheads Forever magazine that cited a couple guest appearances on the album, which is really cool. Tim Ripper Owens appears on the first track, Unbound the Scream, which, given the title and kind of what Owens can do vocally, makes a lot of sense. The screams during the chorus are really cool. They also have Derek Sherinian, keyboardist, ex-Dream Theater, also from Black Country Communion. He plays on Land of Swords, and you can tell, there's a lot of crazy keyboard action on that song, but it's really awesome. The more I listen to this album, the more I just really enjoyed the guitar tone and crunch. The vocals fit really well with it, and I think you're going to hear that here on the sample track I have, which is Beyond the Sands of Time.
What other standout tracks do you have on the album?
Oh, I can do that too. Standout tracks, we have Unbound the Scream, we have the one I just mentioned, Beyond the Sands of Time, Deschichado, or however you say that, Lost Light, and Land of Swords.
And now we'll check out that sample track. Beyond the Sands of Time is the second song off of the new album from Sirius, A Quest for Life. So let's check that out now. Yeah, it's just a great metal sound. I mean, they've got good harmonies there. The instruments are all really well mixed and very aggressive metal sound. These guys are really good, and certainly looking forward to hearing more of this album.
Yeah, not super ultra heavy, and a lot of it's kind of like that mid-tempo stuff, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was really good stuff. Definitely check out Sirius. Mike's first pick of this week. As always, you have 2 picks. What is pick number 2?
Yeah, pick number 2. I kind of briefly alluded to it earlier. This is actually the 5th full-length album from a band based in Martins Ferry, Ohio. They refer to themselves as Heavy Metal Warriors. They started back in 2016, kind of as an individual project from Andrew DeCagna. The band is Ironflame, and the album is Kingdom Torn Asunder.
I thought this was the best album of the week. We'll get a chance to hear Mike talk about it, but this was one of the ones I got to listen to front to back, and if Mike hadn't picked them, I certainly would have. Definitely really good stuff from these Ohio guys.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed as I listened to it when I looked at their Bandcamp and saw they have a Bandcamp exclusive vinyl for sale that was sold out. I'm going to see if some of the other websites might have a copy of it, because this kind of metal, just when I decided I wanted to have a small vinyl collection, it was a band with a sound like this that kind of made me want that. It just seems like the kind of sound I want to hear on a record player. Like I mentioned, the band was formed in 2016. DeCagna was his kind of solo project. He had been in the music scene for quite a while, but mostly as a singer and multi-instrumentalist for a lot of black, doom, and death metal bands, which is kind of wild to think because the guy can sing really well. Not what you'd expect from someone who spent time singing for death metal or black metal bands. Despite being a solo project, he does have a touring lineup. It includes him on vocals, James Babcock on bass, Quinn Lucas on guitars, Jesse Scott on guitars, and Noah Skiba on drums. Angry Metal Guy had a review of this album, and I like the way he kind of just talks about traditional metal in general. He says, quote, "Traditional metal is scientifically proven to possess therapeutic qualities." And from the start of the album, I kind of get it. There's something just kind of familiar about the sound. It's not derivative of other things, but it feels like someplace you've been before. It's hard to describe it without hearing it. But there's definitely a band I want to check out more of. This being their 5th album, I definitely want to go back and listen to some of their earlier work. Standout tracks include Blood and Honor, Soul Survivors, Mistress of Desire, Standing Tall, and Riding the Dragons. But honestly, it's an 8-track album. Just listen to the whole thing. The song I picked out to check out right now is Blood and Honor, the first track.
Yeah, just 39 minutes on this 8-song album, so certainly a very easy listen to be able to get through it, and definitely enjoyed this one. We're going to check out the opening track from Ironflame's Kingdom Torn Asunder. It is Blood and Honor. Let's check that out now. Yeah, this, like I said, this was my favorite album of the week of all the albums that we listened to. These guys are really good. I mean, the songs, I think if you had any kind of a critique, the songs do sound very similar, but I don't think in a bad way. Like, I think they found a setup that works really well for them, and they kind of mastered it on this album. So I think it's better to kind of pick something you do well and do it well through a whole album than to try to branch out too much and then maybe do something that isn't great and it kind of pulls the whole album down. But I think this 8-track album just flies by because of it. It's just really, really good, and the whole thing kind of ties together beginning to end.
Yeah, and that was kind of a point that Angry Metal Guy had as well, where it's like formulas aren't necessarily always bad. They can be good. It's nice to sometimes know what you're getting and actually get it consistently, and this band performs.
Yeah, no question about it. I really like this one. Definitely check out Mike's second pick, Ironflame. Really good stuff from them this week. I've got 2 picks this week, and I'll be honest, like, this is an interesting 2 picks for me because I really feel like these 2 bands are really just doing straight heavy metal. There's not a whole lot there. There's a little bit of derivative like sound, but it's just plain heavy metal, which I really like. It's definitely not necessarily the power metal that I typically choose or the melodic metal. This is very much straight ahead metal, but they both did a really great job. And the first one we're going to talk about is our first ever band chosen from Mexico. This is Battlefront with Among the Corpses. They are a heavy/thrash metal band from Mexico City. According to Encyclopedia Metallum, their first single was released in 2018. It was a little hard to find information actually on both of these bands for different reasons. This band probably because they're a smaller band from Mexico. They released their full-length album in 2020. It was Vengeance. This is a follow-up to that. It's just an EP, 5-track EP, but they do add 3 live tracks, so it does kind of feel like you're getting a full album even on an EP. They've just got a great heavy metal sound, a little thrash, a little new wave of British heavy metal at times. It very much feels like a throwback to what you would have heard in the tape trading days in the early 80s. It almost has a raw sound to it, and I think that's intentional because if you listen to the live tracks, they're actually not quite as raw. The live tracks are kind of a little more, I don't want to say a little more polished because I don't want to make it sound like the other tracks aren't, but it doesn't have that same rawness as the recorded tracks. But so clearly it was a choice. I think they made a really good choice. It's a really great EP. Standout tracks, honestly, it's a short album. You can listen to the whole thing. They're all great. But the standout tracks to me, Lips of Blood, Mirror Mirror, Built for War, and Among the Corpses, the title track, which is what we're going to listen to now. So we will check out this once I share the album on the chat, and I will do that. We're going to check out the 4th track off of this EP, the title track, Among the Corpses from Battlefront, the band from Mexico City, Mexico. Let's check this out now.
Smell of fear, self to the bone, into
This was one where I actually normally I'll start like right at the beginning of a verse, but because of the way these guys sounded, I really kind of wanted a chunk of the instrumental part instead. Like the vocals are great, they really fit well, but I really think the music definitely gives you the vibes you're looking for. Chris mentioned very Maiden-like. I definitely can hear that as well. But again, for a smallish band in Mexico, I think they really did a great job. Your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I definitely kind of get the new wave of British heavy metal and early like thrash sound to it. My thoughts listening to it was I could hear a little bit of like old Anthrax or Death Angel in it. Mm-hmm. And the lead singer kind of sounded like John Bush to me, which none of that is a bad thing at all. Kind of on the production, you're right. It does sound like something that was recorded in 1983. And it's funny to think that the live sound, ultimately when you have a live album, you want it to sound like you're actually there live. So you almost can't have it sound like the conscious decision to make your studio album sound dated. It just wouldn't work. But really dig this. It's definitely something I want to hear more of.
Yeah, definitely check out Battlefront. Really good stuff from them. Again, EP Among the Corpses, definitely worth checking out. That was my first pick of the week. We will skip on down to our second pick of the week. And again, just another heavy metal band, just playing straight ahead heavy metal. This is a band from Austin, Texas. It's called Mean Mistreater with the album Razor Wire. They just formed in 2023. This is their first full-length album. Their Bandcamp says they were inspired by bands like Chastain, Warlock, and Wasp. I definitely kind of got the Wasp vibes in some places during this album. Also some reviews on Encyclopedia Metallum that compared them to some of the heavier releases from Saxon. I kind of hear a little bit of that as well. But just really straight ahead heavy metal, I would say similar to the first band I chose in some ways, but I would say maybe a little less raw, a little more polished, I think. And again, I think by choice. But I really enjoyed this album beginning to end. Standout tracks were Forget It, Razor Wire, Bleeding the Night, and the song we're going to listen to a little bit of called Let 'Em Roll. And we'll check out that now. It's the fifth track on Mean Mistreater's new album, Razor Wire. It is Let 'Em Roll, and let's let it roll. Would help if I unmuted yours, then I unmute mine. I just, again, feel like it's very straightforward, very straight ahead. Does have a little bit of thrash element, does a little bit of kind of like the first band, little new wave of British heavy metal feel to it as well. But again, I really enjoyed these guys. Your thoughts on Mean Mistreater?
Yeah, obviously you can see the comparison between bands like Warlock and Chastain being female-fronted metal bands. I do hear some Wasp in there with the guitar tones, but it's so weird to me sometimes when there are bands getting together in 2023 that just want to play metal, and that's clearly what their goal is, and that's never a bad thing. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on this band moving forward because they got a great sound.
Yeah, Chris agreeing as well. Yeah, if by all means choose it as one of your year-end picks when we get around to that later in the year. But again, normally a little bit different than what I typically pick, but I just two straight-ahead metal bands that I thought really rocked this week. That was Mean Mistreater with Razor Wire. That wraps up our new picks for this week. If you're listening on the podcast version of this podcast, we will be stepping aside for a break. When we come back, we will head into the vault, where Mike and I will give you classic albums you need to check out. We'll do that on the other side of this break here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, Music Weekly rolling on. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. You can check out our store while you're there. You can check out previous episodes of the Nerdcast Empire while you're there as well. We are 26 episodes into Music Weekly, believe it or not. We are 87 episodes into the Nerdcast Empire. Tentatively, we will have an episode Thursday night, episode 88. It would be Anime Thursdays. A lot's going to depend on our tennis schedule because we do have a match on Thursday. It is a home match, so hopefully we'll be back. So tentatively, we'll have an episode 7 p.m. Eastern Time. But obviously, check our social media for any updates to that. It may get pushed back. It may get canceled altogether. We know for sure 1 week from tonight, we'll be back with you once again for another episode of Music Weekly. We're into August now. What date are we looking at for this next episode in August? August the 3rd? 2nd? 2nd. August 2nd. I was close. August the 2nd will be our music for next week. So definitely check that out next Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, here on the Nerdcast Empire. But it's time to go into the vault, and we are almost at the end of the alphabet. We are down to the final couple of picks for Mike. He started many weeks ago going through the alphabet with classic albums that influenced his music fandom. We are up to the letter Y now, and certainly as we've gotten into these later letters, the selections that were possible are much, much less just because of the letters. But got a good pick this week for the letter Y. What do you have for us?
Yeah, letter Y was pretty difficult. I think my options were a couple selections that I don't think reasonably could be alphabetized under Y because it was someone's first name. Also had Yes, but we've talked about them on a previous episode. So it left only a couple options, really. And as I kind of preface that, I should probably mention, as a fan of Hunter x Hunter, I've enjoyed the music from the 2011 adaptation. Through that, I was introduced to this band. They have several songs that were featured as endings to the show. The album that I chose has two of those songs. The album is Land from 2013 from the band Yuzu.
Yeah, these guys are good. It's kind of cool to see them spotlighted. Still very active, which is great to see. Sometimes you check these bands out from a few years ago and you find out, and especially with Japanese rock bands, kind of feels like they blow up quick and then they disappear. Yeah. But these guys are still going at it, which is great to see. Yeah,
it's kind of interesting because they've been around since 1997. The members of the band are Eugene Kitagawa and Koji Iwasama. They both sing and play guitar. They started as street musicians, calling themselves Lights, but later changed their name to Yuzu, which is like a Japanese citrus fruit, kind of like a lemon, I guess. But Land is their 11th studio album and was their 8th album to reach number 1 on the Oricon charts. So they've been doing pretty well for themselves, even before the Hunter x Hunter exposure. This album has songs that encourage people to overcome disaster, kind of in the wake of the 2011 Tohoku earthquake. Debuted at number 1 on the Oricon and the Billboard Japan's weekly album rankings, was certified gold by the RIAJ, and also won the Japan Record Awards for Best Album in 2013. As I mentioned before, it does feature a couple songs from Hunter x Hunter, Reason, the third ending, and Nagari Boshi Kirari, the fourth ending. Both great songs. Oddly enough, they also have the fifth and sixth ending, which is the same song, but it's on the subsequent album, Shinsekai. The song is Hiyori Itai, which is probably the best song of the of the three, but I kind of went with quantity over quality in this case.
Sure.
The music isn't heavy by any means. A lot of times we're talking acoustic guitars, and really what kind of sells these guys is their vocal harmony. Standout tracks for this album, we're talking Reason, Land, Blackbird, With You, and Nagari Boshi Kirari, like I mentioned before. It's just really enjoyable sounding music. You can play it in the background. It won't distract you a whole lot. Just really, really great harmonies, nice guitar work. What else can I say?
Yeah, it's great to see another Japanese group kind of get some love on this podcast. We talk so much about Japanese music, especially on our anime podcast, but there's a lot of great rock music out there, and a group like this that really became notable maybe to the West because of what they did for Hunter x Hunter, but were clearly very successful in and of themselves before they really got any anime themes, and those are kind of the cool ones to find that they found their way kind of into the anime world, which then opened up their exposure to the entire world. So great to see. These guys are good, and certainly if you're a fan of Hunter x Hunter, the anime, you probably are familiar with these guys, and it'd be good to check out maybe more of their catalog outside of their anime songs as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's Yuzu, Mike's pick in the vault for this week. Now becomes the time where we go through the exercise of finding all the great albums in a certain year. Of course, I started many weeks ago going through year by year and picking an album that was influential to me. We started back in 1969 with the Chicago Transit Authority, the debut album from the band that would later be called Chicago. And we've rolled on, and we've checked out a lot of great albums. As we've gotten into the late 80s and now we're getting into 1990 this week, we've also kind of gone through and talked about some of the other albums that came out, because this week may have been the hardest one yet, because there are several of these albums I'm going to mention that I have on my iPod that I still listen to. Because as we've talked about before, I'm not necessarily an album listener. Like, I typically get the songs I like. But there are some albums in this, including the one that I'm going to choose, that I own, that are just phenomenal start to finish albums. And in 1990, other picks that I did not pick but could have, starting off with Shake Your Moneymaker, the debut studio album from the Black Crowes. And talk about coming out of the gates. You got Twice as Hard, Jealous Again, Hard to Handle, She Talks to Angels, a big album from those guys. Didn't make the cut this week. I think definitely my favorite AC/DC album came out in 1990, The Razor's Edge. Included Thunderstruck, Money Talks. Money Talks is probably the most underrated AC/DC song of all time.
It's a quality song.
That's a great song. That's a great album. Definitely, if you're not like a huge AC/DC guy, but you like some of their stuff, you should definitely check out The Razor's Edge. I think it's a really underrated album. Outside of the rock sphere, there was some great outside the rock albums this week. One that certainly got consideration for me was Wilson Phillips, their debut album, which was titled Wilson Phillips, which included Hold On, Release Me, Impulsive, You're in Love, just mega hits. They're so talented. If you're a fan of 80s and 90s pop music, there's no doubt you are a fan of Wilson Phillips. But didn't pick that one. This was probably the runner-up this week because I've listened to this album many times and I have it on my iPod. It was After the Rain by Nelson. I think this is a start to finish album for me. I've listened to this one a lot. Can't Live Without Your Love and Affection, I Can Hardly Wait, After the Rain, Tracy's song Only Time Will Tell, More Than Ever, It's Just Desire, Fill You Up, Interlude and Everywhere I Go, Bits and Pieces and Will You Love Me. Just talk about a couple of guys that just have amazing harmony. That's what those guys do. So definitely worth checking out. Some other ones before we get to my pick, Winger in the Heart of the Young also came out, which also had some great stuff on there, including Miles Away, which is probably one of my favorite Winger songs. Easy Come, Easy Go, Can't Get Enough. That's a good one as well. Definitely worth checking out. This was another one that was under consideration. Another album I have in its entirety. It's the debut album from Firehouse, entitled Firehouse, which is great stuff. Rock on the Radio, All She Wrote, Shake and Tumble, Don't Treat Me Bad, Ought to Be a Law, Lover's Lane, Home is Where the Heart Is, Don't Walk Away, Seasons of Change, Overnight Sensation. That's a great song. Love of a Lifetime, and Helpless. Love that one. Another non-metal album, No Fences by Garth Brooks, came out in 1990. Wow. That's just a monster album. The Thunder Rolls, A New Way to Fly, Two of a Kind Working on a Full House, Victim of the Game, Friends in Low Places, Wild Horses, Unanswered Prayers, Same Old Story, Mr. Blue and Wolves. That's as good as it gets from Garth Brooks. Phenomenal album. I already picked Mindcrime, so I didn't pick Empire. I kind of because I just picked Mindcrime, but I probably otherwise would have picked Empire because this is probably, as far as the music goes, my favorite Queensryche album. Best I Can, Jet City Woman, Another Rainy Night Without You, Empire, Resistance, Silent Lucidity, Anybody Listening, all just amazing tracks.
Yeah.
There's no bad tracks on that album. An album that gets hate, and even a little bit by the band themselves, but definitely deserves a mention. It is Cherry Pie by Warrant. I know everybody hates the opening song, and the band hated the fact that this was their single off of this album. But this album also includes Uncle Tom's Cabin, I Saw Red, Bed of Roses, Blind Faith, Mr. Rainmaker. It's a great album that really just got sabotaged because of a title track.
It is an amazing album, honestly, front to back. The ones you mentioned are great, but Sure Feels Good to Me is an awesome song.
Yeah.
You're the Only Hell Your Mama Ever Raised. Just Train, the cover song, just so good.
You want to talk about a band that just got pigeonholed, and they were way more talented than
to
people.
me, that album is complete without Cherry Pie. It didn't even need it.
Oh, no doubt about that. And then one other album that I really like that was in the consideration is Rust in Peace by Megadeth. Holy Wars, Hangar 18, Take No Prisoners, Five Magics on side 1, Poison Was the Cure, Lucretia, Tornado of Souls, Dawn Patrol, and Rust in Peace Polaris on side 2. I mean, that's great stuff. Some of my favorite Megadeth songs on that album. So
When you're talking best of the big four, it doesn't get any better than Rust in Peace.
That's 100% the case. In the end, after all that, the band that we ended up choosing was Extreme, and it was Extreme 2 Pornograffiti that ended up being the pick. Released almost 34 years ago to the date. It was actually August the 7th of 1990. This is just a phenomenal album, start to finish. This is one of my all-time favorite bands. Again, kind of got lumped in with hair metal, which really is not fair. These guys are way more talented than that. In reality, it's kind of funk metal, if you will. And I think you get to hear that really on this album. Almost everybody will know More Than Words. It was a huge song. It was kind of the ballad. Wholehearted is another one that I think is probably what everybody would know that maybe don't know this album, but it's so good. Decadent Dance is a huge hit right off the bat. Little Jack Horny, When I'm President, Get the Funk Out. That's really their funk song, and it's got radio airplay. Then More Than Words, Money in God We Trust. It's a monster. Pornograffiti, the title track, which of course, as it turns out, also was one of my favorite Japanese bands named themselves after this track, Pornograffiti. Many people will know them from the anime world. When I First Kiss You, Susie, He-Man, Woman Hater, Song for Love, and of course it wraps up with Wholehearted. These guys are so talented. You look at just musicianship, Nuno Bettencourt, Gary Sharon, two of the more talented guys in the music industry, and this was really at their peak. And of all the albums, and again, there were lots of ways to go, and there may be others that you have, Mike, but to me, this was such a statement from these guys, and I think that's kind of why I ended up choosing that one.
Yeah, it's a great album for sure, and anyone who would refer to this band as simply a hair metal band in a derogatory way is probably nowhere near the musician that Nuno Bettencourt is.
Yeah.
Just being real about it. Decadence Dance, great song. Little Jack Horny, Get the Funk Out, More Than Words, He-Man, Woman Hater, Wholehearted, just great songs. I'm not one of those like hot take or unpopular opinion guys. That's not really my thing. But I think you could actually make the argument that Gary Sharon's the best singer Van Halen had.
There's a legitimate case to be made for it, I think. I don't think it's probably controversial to some people, but man, like when you hear his vocals, I mean, if you just pop this album in and listen to Decadent Dance and just hear the vocals and through the chorus of that, he's doing stuff that the other guys in that band could not possibly do.
And, I'm never going to suggest that he was the more iconic frontman than David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar.
Right.
Obviously, that's not the case. But as far as just pure vocal ability, Gary Sharon's great.
Yeah, he is. And I think, again, the combination of him and Bettencourt really working together just created this amazing music. And the harmonies that those guys created. Again, you had this band that had the ability to perform some of the, again, a song like Get the Funk Out, which is it's basically funk rock. It's something that would have been a derivative of any number of funk bands from the 70s and 80s. And then you have a song like Wholehearted that is just, to me, it feels like a 90s era Seven Bridges Road for this type of music where you just have a great, catchy track, but with phenomenal harmonies and great music in the background. More Than Words is another one that's it's iconic from this era. But again, then they can rock it out as they did throughout this album in addition to that. So these guys are so good, and that's why in the end I had to pick that. Was there any other albums that I missed that like I said, 90 was loaded. I cut the list off at some point because it's just like, there are too many good albums in 1990.
Like in some of these years, you can't pick one. You almost have to do like a top 5 because there were so many good albums.
I could have done that with the ones I listed because there were several of those other ones that I really liked.
Things that I don't recall you mentioning, but you may have. Gwar, Scumdogs of the Universe came out. Tremendous debut out. Not so much debut. Hello was first, but this is kind of the debut full-length kind of real offering of theirs. Great album. Slaughter, Stick It To Ya. MC Hammer's Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em.
Yeah.
Let's see, Gamma Ray, Heading for Tomorrow, great album. The self-titled Damn Yankees album.
Yeah, that's a great one, too.
Death Angels, Act 3, really good. The self-titled Steelheart album.
Yeah.
Danzig with Danzig 2, Lucifuge, great album. Poison's Flesh and Blood. Blind Guardian, Tales from the Twilight World. Pantera's Cowboys from Hell.
Yeah.
Let's see, Rat's Detonator, Anthrax's Persistence of Time. Judas Priest's Painkiller came out.
Yeah.
Slayer's Seasons in the Abyss, and Testament's Souls of Black came out as well.
It was a loaded year, as most of these years have been. But, I mean, it's no matter what type of rock or metal music you like, there was something really large that came out in 1990. And I'm sure that's going to continue as we go into the early 90s. But just some great music. Hopefully something there you like. And I realize I don't think we ever posted the playlist in the chat. So let me do that real quick before we sign off. But a lot of really good stuff this week, new stuff as well, and certainly again we encourage you to go through Mike's playlist and find some bands that you really like and see what you would choose for your bands each week. A lot of great stuff out there, so definitely check that out. That is going to bring this edition of Music Weekly to a close once again. Big thanks to everybody who tuned in live or checked us out on the VOD. We really appreciate all of your support. Big thanks to Chris for holding down the chat as always. Big thanks to Mike for putting all this stuff together and joining me each and every week. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast each and every week. Again, we may be back on Thursday. Certainly check social media. We'll let you know. If we are, it'll be at around 7 o'clock, maybe a little bit later for Anime Thursdays. We're probably getting close to another music episode. I don't know if we'll do that this week or next. Probably will be next week, just to give us a little more time to prep for that. So we'll see what we've got planned for this Thursday. If not, we will definitely be back 1 week from tonight for another Music Weekly. August the 2nd on tap next week, and we'll certainly check out and hopefully get some more great music next week. That's going to wrap things up for this week. For the entire crew, I am Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.